now. So there we are. So this meeting is being recorded for public benefit and public good. And BritBanglaCovid was actually founded in May 2019 at the initial period of the lockdown, when the government said, okay, we must go on lockdown, the first lockdown. And it was founded then to really understand how the pandemic may have impacted Bangladeshis. At that time, I didn't realize that whilst lockdown was happening, that later on, during the second phase of the pandemic, we were to find that the Bangladeshis unfortunately had lost lives. So I had the privilege to kind of record and document all those things throughout the pandemic. But as I was doing it, I was coming across stories, and many of these stories actually resulted me going deeper into many lives of individuals, Bangladeshi individuals. And of course, there were people who were traumatized by the event, but also many who actually had their own trauma prior to the pandemic. It was quite interesting to capture their stories, really. And this is how, I guess, BritBanglaCovid kind of came into prominence. And also we organized various campaigns to make sure people were vaccinated, and people's stories and their lives were shared to encourage community activities and community action. And I'm proud to say BritBanglaCovid played its part to help community members to be vaccinated. And I'm not sure if you had the opportunity to have a read at the recent current COVID disparities report published by the government on the 3rd of December. On page 126, you see that Bangladeshi vaccine uptake was the highest compared to any other ethnic groups. And that's partly because of the campaign organized by our community. And of course, women have also played their part. So it's important that in times of International Women's Month, that we talk about the experience of Bangladeshis. So enough of me. Let me pass the stewardship to Judge Khatun Sapnara. So please take it away, and let's talk about the experience of British Bangladeshis in Britain.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to Ripon for all the effort that's gone into organising this event. We've got an absolutely amazing panel of women speakers today, with really rich experiences and expertise that they're going to share with us. The format is going to be that I'm going to take them through various areas of discussion that are relevant to women, Bangladeshi women, and the issue around COVID. There'll be an opportunity for some question and answers session before we hear from Professor Mahendra Patel, and Ripon will then close the afternoon. The speakers are as follows: Jusna Begum, who is a lady who has been the body washer for the Muslim deceased. I think you'll all agree, an incredibly vital role at any time, but particularly during the pandemic. Julie Begum, who is the founder of the Swadhinata Trust, who has been very instrumental in promoting the culture and history of the Bangladeshi heritage of the British Bangladeshi community, to keep that alive. We have Tanzila Zamam, who is a engineer by profession, but has also appeared significantly in the media, writing and presenting and speaking about parental dynamics and women's empowerment. Ummul Chowdhury, who has been involved in driving forward leadership and frontline organisations such as Frontline Aid, of which she is CEO. Hasina Mumtaz, whose history involves her being an advisor to 2 successive London mayors, and also now someone that is producing in the creative field, producing really beautiful jewellery. And we also have Megna Uddin, who is involved in the community action development, and she has recently won an award for services to the local community. We also have Rekeya Miah, who is a Deputy Director of Nursing and has been instrumental in campaign for vaccination drive, both at a local and national drive, no doubt takes a lot of the credit for the uptake in a community that was said from the outset to be very vaccine hesitant. And we also have Rezna Khatun, who has written about domestic abuse. She herself is a survivor and has undertaken really important work in that field. And lastly, we will have Mahendra Patel to speak about national programs around COVID and vaccination. And so I think what I might do, actually, having just given a very broad overview of each panelist, I think what I might ask is for each of them just to speak very briefly about who they are, so that the audience can understand and what they do, just so that we lay the background before we have the discussion. So if I can ask you in order, if I can ask Jusna Begum to speak first, please. Jusna, is she there? If not, what I might do is come back to Jusna and go on to Julie Begum, please.
Hello, good afternoon. And I'm really delighted to be here with you. I'm sorry I'm not going to put my camera on. I'm currently with COVID and I'm not at my best. So if you don't mind, I'll just speak.
No problem.
So as Ripon has outlined in his introduction, since the beginning of the pandemic, there has been a huge impact on the British Bangladeshi community. And twice as many of us have died from COVID as our British counterparts, or white counterparts. And so it's been really vital to understand sort of the underlying reasons for this. And as a result, the Shadinata Trust, which I am chair of, has worked with King's College London to do a piece of research on looking at the impact of COVID on the Bangladeshi community in East London. And we interviewed older people over the age of 60, men and women, in Sylheti dialect, because that was their preferable language. And we did this during the pandemic over the phone because we couldn't meet anyone. And we asked them about their experiences of COVID, how they were coping with that, and their experiences of engaging with the kind of messages that were being put out by the government and health authorities, and how they were dealing with it. And then we looked at their carers and social contacts and how they were supporting these older members of our community. And what they were doing was really quite key in mediating the kind of messages and the kind of services and impact that the COVID was having on their relatives and the community as a whole. So it was really vital that we understood what was going on amongst the most vulnerable members of our community, the ones who are least likely to access the kind of messages and services that were available to mainstream society. And as a result, we decided to put together videos in Sylheti language with health professionals from the NHS and other agencies, so that people could get these messages directly from people in the community who they trusted. And we worked with younger people as well to find out how they were supporting the rest of the community. And we put together
Julie, we've lost your sound. It's became distorted towards the end anyway. If you can hear me, I'm going to ask you to pause now, please, and then I'm going to move on to Tanzila Zamam for Tanzila to tell us a little bit about herself. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good afternoon, everyone. I really apologize for my camera. Suddenly it's not coming up. Never mind, my voice is here with you all. Well, I am in profession an engineer, coming back from Bangladesh, being international student in London, and I was been here a decade. And apart from my profession, I was very, very passionate about women empowerment and coaching and mentoring. So I am right now working with few organizations like Career Ready, therefore mentoring in university and college. Also, I work with Princess Diana's Award organization, where also I'm working as a career mentor. And apart from this, my own practice, I'm doing the coaching and mentoring for women empowerment. It's kind of more 7 years in my community, especially British Bangladeshi, where I find all the women, they have some voices, but they are the social dilemma. They don't want to be, harassment in the community and public places. So they don't want to open up their personal the crisis. So in a nutshell, doing women empowerment few years, I find that there are different level of women in our society, this up to down. And most of them, they are in dark. They might have the skill and expertise they want to explore and flourish. Somewhere they are very. I was working with Ripon. He was had interviewed me, and I share all my experience. What happened. Maybe some women are not. Also some men, husband, they have no work, financial outcome, so they are in home, and they had a really, really huge impact negatively. And really, I was like witness on kind of in the midnight 12 a.m. Yeah, 1 a.m. they told me, Appa, I'm so blah blah blah, I can talk because of my in-laws, because of my husband, they're abusing. So it was really, really hard, and it hurts my heart too. So I was trying to help them personal development in different way, emotional intelligence, also like mental health support. So in a nutshell, over a few years, and this COVID give me a new way to help my women, my sisters in the community. So thank you is a nutshell to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then can I come to Ummul, please?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here today. Just to start, because you said we're talking about women and Bangladeshi Bengali women, and just my background. So I grew up in North London. I went to work in media. So I was working actually in the Middle East a lot, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And then I went on to Syria and founded a charity. So I was living in Syria when the war started. You didn't get many Bengali women out there. So if you picture a humanitarian aid worker, I think it's unfortunate that most likely none of us would really picture a Bengali woman. But I think we do masses for our community in different ways. But I've also so I continue to work with Syrian refugees and in war zones. I've lived in Palestine and Jordan as well, and I'm currently based in Berlin. And I've also founded a tech company that services some of the issues that we face in the humanitarian aid industry. And I think just thinking about how we look at our community and women from the international aid perspective, I was very much thinking about, global remittances and how much support we gave during COVID. It was worth over 500 billion. The international aid sector is worth around 151 billion. The disparity is enormous, and Bangladesh really, benefited from the international community that supported it through COVID, family and friends who were sick. I also had a bit of a frontline view to what was going on because I was locked out of the UK when COVID happened. I couldn't travel. Members of my family were hospitalized, so it was very difficult, but my brother's a doctor. So I ended up with family members actually buying him the COVID masks initially because the government wasn't supplying it. So we really had a frontline view. And at the same time, I was running the campaign in Syria with refugee populations which had very poor health services about how to deal with the pandemic. So there was on multiple fronts that I was dealing with these issues. And I saw a massive parallel between how in the UK, the Bengali community was suffering from inequality, but structural inequality. I know this is bandied about a lot, but it really came through in the NHS, where we have so many ethnic minorities, including a lot of Bengali doctors and professionals and nurses and cleaners, and there's no leadership. The leadership in the UK, they don't rise to the decision-making position. So policy was failing us, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But this is also reflected in the work that I do, where I talked about remittances. We're not reflected in the international charity world. We do so much work as a community, but our aid and our money isn't recognized. You know, if you think of charity, think of humanitarianism, there's that white savior thing going. So my line of work, I'm working in that right now. I'm also working on a book, United Nonsense. The name might tell you a little bit about how I see this space, but it's also my desire to share my story, because I don't think I'm so unique. We just don't have so many stories that are coming out of our community showing what we do. Like our generation have done so much in the UK, and I'm always meeting amazing people, but they're locked into silos and we don't hear about them. So I have to disagree in a way with our earlier speaker about saying what women can achieve. We are doing a lot, and considering when we arrived in the UK and our economic position at the time, I think this is great. And thank you so much for being here. I'd love to take some questions later.
Thank you very much, Ummul. I'm going to move on now to Hasina Mumtaz. I hope she's there, just to tell us in brief about herself and what she's going to be bringing to this conversation, essentially, in terms of her experience and expertise.
Assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for inviting me onto this panel, and having heard some of my peers speak, it's a very illustrious panel, so I feel really honoured to be here. I will keep my introduction relatively brief, because I will talk about some of my own perspectives on some of the issues that we're going to be discussing. So I started my career in media and communications just over 25 years ago. I started off in a local authority press team. And in 2003, I moved into the Mayor of London's press office. So I initially started advising Ken Livingstone, and I advised him over the next 5 years. During that time, I worked on international breaking news stories and led on the media response with colleagues to things like the London bombings. I was also working on some of the work around bringing the Olympic Games to London. And in 2008, Boris Johnson was elected Mayor of London, and I decided at that time that I wanted to stay on. It's a politically neutral role, so you are an advisor to the Mayor of London, regardless of the person or the party that is elected to that office. And I had met Boris a couple of times. We had got on quite well, and I could see that they were going to bring in different perspectives. So I decided to stay on. And also to kind of enhance my credibility as a neutral communications professional. So I was there, and I stayed there for another 4 years, during which time, it actually was my last weekend on call, the London riots happened. So my plans for a really quiet weekend just went out the window, and I spent sort of 9 hours outside New Scotland Yard, just handling media interviews and briefings with the Met Police. I then moved on, and through various sort of other roles, then was at Transport for London during the London 2012 Games, and that gave me an amazing opportunity. It was an opportunity. I'd been headhunted for the role because of my expertise in the Mayor's office to advise the Chief Executive and the senior leadership team at Transport for London on crisis communications around the Olympic Games. And as a result of that, I got an opportunity to go to the opening ceremony for the Paralympics, which is not something I probably would have experienced or will probably experience again. And that was another fantastic opportunity for someone like me, who comes from actually a very, very humble start in South London, where I've always lived. In 2014, something happened in my personal life, which I will speak about. It was the death of my son, who was killed in a road traffic collision by an uninsured driver. And that then led to me making a conscious decision to put my career on hold and start to find out, to learn more about Islam, because after Sammy's death, I had so many questions that were unanswered. And as a result of that, my kind of life journey took a slightly different path. In 2016, 2 years later, I decided to go back to work. And again, after a lot of reflection, I decided to go and do something that I'd always wanted to do, which was to work in the humanitarian development sector. So I joined Islamic Relief, and I started there as a media manager. And after about 6 months, after a competitive process, I became the interim head of communications. I was seconded into that role to take over from my boss. I was there for just over 2 years, after which time I again decided to take a career break to pursue other things that I was interested in. And part of that is what I'll talk about, because I talk about my jewelry business later on, and I'll explain how that then came about during that time off. Most recently, I've joined as Deputy Director for Media, Campaigns and Public Engagement at ActionAid UK. I've just had my 3rd week. So very new there, but ActionAid is the UK arm is part of a federation of 45 offices around the world. So you have ActionAid America, you have ActionAid South Africa, ActionAid Australia, for example. And what this organization does is it, as well as providing humanitarian aid in the event of emergencies, they also do sustainable development projects, but they also lobby and advocate for the rights of women and girls around the world. So that's something that's very close to my heart. I've also been a journalist. I was editor-in-chief of a community newspaper. I've written for most of the community newspapers, and I've also presented on community channels like Channel S and NTV. And I've also been involved in various charities, such as the CAP Foundation. When the Sabah disaster happened in Bangladesh, some friends and I got together and we fundraised, and we raised, I think, over 14 or 15,000 pounds within a week. And then some of my friends went out to Bangladesh and distributed that themselves. I was also involved with BBC We, which is the British Bangladesh Chamber of Women Entrepreneurs, which aim to get women of British Bangladeshi women involved in business by setting them up with mentors, doing workshops, facilitating seminars so that they could support each other and also get training and experience and education in setting up a business. I've also been very involved in getting the British Muslim community more involved in both kind of understanding how the media operates and engaging with the media and in political processes. So I was on the South London Steering Group for MEND, which is Muslim Engagement and Development. Yeah, I think that's probably enough from me, and people are probably bored by now.
No, thank you very much. That's all really important, incredibly impressive. And I think the audience can probably gather by now why it is I've asked each of these individual amazing women to tell us about themselves, because I couldn't possibly do justice to their experience and expertise and their incredibly impressive CVs. So thank you for that. And I ought to add, actually, with Hasina, I had no idea that Hasina was the creator of jewellery that was purchased for me by my clerks when I left my last court. It's absolutely beautiful. I'd never seen anything like it. And then I read an interview that you'd done with Ripon, and there were so many points of mutual reference that it was quite affirming for me. Thank you very much. We'll speak more about all of that. I'm going to then move on, please, to Megna Uddin, who is involved in the community action and development sphere.
Oh, hi, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Thank you, Judge Sapnara, and thank you, Ripon, for inviting myself and all the lovely ladies that are part of the panel. So myself, I've had a very mixed, varied career and different varied life chapters as well. So from the beginning, I'll just go back a bit. I was self-employed about just over 15, 20 years ago. I was in the restaurant and catering business. And I think at that time, I probably was one of the very first, because I went into the family businesses, and it wasn't that known that many women were in that sector. So I worked my way up. I worked as bar staff, as waiting staff, and I helped in the kitchen and many other factors, and acquired many other businesses and learned about business processes at that time. And then certain life situations happened, and I'm also a survivor as well. And I've had a lot of ups and downs in life, and then it came to a point where I had to build myself up again. So when we speak about female empowerment, especially with women and girls, that's something really I'm passionate about speaking out about domestic abuse, sexual harassment, and what women and girls can face and are facing. So after that, I decided, what do I do now? Certain chapters did affect my mental health. I suffered from some depression, but I had to find a way to put myself out in the real world again, because being self-employed is a totally different experience to when you're out there and you're working for someone. And it was a learning curve for me. I then acquired a role in school. So I joined the education sector, secondary school, and I worked my way up from being a part-time role to being supervising students and working in behavior management with 11 to 19-year-olds. And also along the way, I was a part of a team that created extracurricular activities for girls. It was a girls' school in East London. Then 5-6 years into my role, I wanted to do more work in the community. So I decided to get my youth and community work qualification, and then just went in to join a youth and community-based organisation in Tower Hamlets, Newark, East London, where I acquired the role of senior youth worker, lead senior youth worker, developing projects for young people, girls and women. That's when I really developed my skills in community work. So developing projects for women-only projects, women-only events, and for young people. So it's something that I found there was a gap, that we needed to do more to get women and girls involved, since we're talking about British Bangladeshi women. So that side came, that's how my journey into community work started, community action, charity work. I'm co-founder of my own charity, which raises awareness on homelessness and those that are in need, not only here in the UK, but also in Bangladesh. I do a lot of link work with some schools there, and developing strategies for young people to get involved in community action in Bangladesh as well as a social workers platform. Coming back to COVID response work, I was headhunted and started working for an organisation in Camden, BWA, based at Surma Community Centre, where I did just over a year of community COVID response work, where it was an eye-opener for me. I then acquired an interim role position as CEO, interim CEO for the organisation, and got involved in a lot of strategic work on different panels in Camden as well, tackling food poverty and developing projects around COVID response for the elderly, for families in need, and creating a team of outreach workers that could adapt their skills, not only in person, because of the restrictions, it was very hard. So we had to adapt a lot of the work, doing community-based hot meals, and just outreach work, befriending, and a lot of other factors, reaching out to the community. I found that the elderly were a lot affected, especially our Bangladeshi elders in Camden, not only in Camden, but also in East London as well. And that was something that really enriched my knowledge there. I currently acquired a position which I was voted in to be vice chair for Newark, East London, a community-based organisation, which I mentioned earlier. So it's a matter of gaining all these experiences and how I've put that and made that to use to benefit those that I'm helping. So yeah, thank you.
That's extraordinary. Thank you very much indeed, Megna. I think I saw a note in the sidebar that in the chat that Jusna was trying to join and having technical difficulties. So as and when she joins, we'll get back to her. But if I can then move on to ask Rekeya Miah to say something. And Rekeya is Deputy Director of the Nursing in nursing and was instrumental in the campaign to increase the levels of vaccination locally and on a national level. So Rekeya.
Jazakallah, assalamu alaikum, and hello everyone. I think I've sorted the IT issues courtesy of my son. I'm absolutely delighted and privileged to be here. What can I say? You know, it's absolutely amazing. So, you know, my thanks to you, profound thanks to you, Judge Sapnara and Ripon, for organising and inviting. So as you've introduced me, Deputy Associate Director, a bit of a mouthful really, of nursing, and I'm a senior midwife and a professional midwifery advocate for coming up to about 30 years, I guess. And, you know, you blink and you realise you've been in the job for this long. So I work in the West Yorkshire district, and as you've described, I have been immersed in the COVID vaccination programme uptake. And it is around health inequalities, a topic that I feel very strongly about. As a Bangladeshi Muslim woman and as a healthcare professional and an academic, it is something that's very, very close to my heart. I started my journey in 1991, all those decades ago, at a time when going into nursing and midwifery was frowned upon. It wasn't the done thing for South Asian women. You know, I seem to be doing a few first things, being the eldest in the family, and then going and breaking those barriers. It seems to be a label that's attached to me as I go along the way, you know, completely busy with what I'm doing. So started my journey as a nurse. I remember being at a rural hospital, one of probably three, and did we stand out like a sore thumb. Everywhere we went, we attracted attention. People were curious, and I'm talking about our white counterparts. Some of the, I suppose, curiosity was professional, others was just societal. The two other girls that were with me on the journey probably have since left now, but they found it irritating. I didn't. I was curious, you know, in a similar way. So I wasn't born here. I came at the age of 8, you know, this tomboy rebel that, you know, my dad decided that we needed to settle here for a better life. So it was all very new, and then having to go and fit into the education system, which was naturally curious. I'm of Sylheti origin, Bangladeshi. I've grown up in the outdoors. I've known warm weather, greenery, all that kind of scenery, and then coming into dull grey buildings, it just didn't seem to be the thing. So to put a long story short, became a nurse and specialised in surgery, critical care, theatre nursing, areas where you wouldn't see a South Asian woman at all. After practicing, which I loved, you know, it was the right thing to do, although at school I was told that wasn't the career that I should be going, it would be too difficult. I've always been academic. I don't realise I am, and it's only when you pause, so I didn't understand why they felt that I couldn't go into nursing and why on earth it was so academic. I'd gone to 2 very good schools, you know, grammar schools, so it puzzled me. Nonetheless, I made up my mind and I went into nursing and made a career of it. 12 years later, after being married by that point, met my husband, got married, and it was a match made kind of a marriage. Although my girls would say, "Oh, so what do you mean match made? It's arranged." I said, "Well, yeah, it's the middle of the road thing." So I had 2 children, and that's when I decided that my lifelong passion of being a midwife was what was beckoning. Went back into education, balancing the midwifery degree, and met more barriers. You know, again, there isn't any Asian midwife. I probably was one of the first, let alone a Bangladeshi South Asian woman. So became a midwife, and then since then I've carried on studying, undertaken a couple of masters in leadership and in advanced practice. I love my job. I live and breathe my job. I care about people. The service of others seems to be the most rewarding thing for me. I connect with people. It doesn't matter what background, what gender, what sexuality someone comes from. I have the ability to be able to come up with a common ground. So after being in the acute sector for many years, I then was asked to support the COVID vaccination program. I was recruited and I went into this post last year. Someone that's been in nursing and midwifery, juggled both, and thrived on the acute sector, then was asked to go into a community setting because it required inclusive, authentic, lived experiences as a leader. There was a lot of vaccine hesitancy. There was a lot of conspiracy theories churning around the Bradford district. It's one of the most deprived of the districts in the NHS and in England. But it's also one of the richest, most globally connected districts you could come across. It absolutely is the most beautiful place. So I set about having engaged in conversations with various communities, regardless of religion and background, you name it, and I've gone with my pop-up team to create something very new. Moving a vaccine, which is delicate, was unheard of. So I met a lot of challenges from pharmaceutical and medical colleagues. Are you mad? What are you thinking of? I did my homework. I did the research. I knew what governances needed to go, so why not? I wasn't expecting people to come to the massive mass vaccination centres because people had anxieties and worries. Some of our Central Eastern European communities held views that related back to Nazi Germany. People went into buildings, never came out. So I needed to adopt different strategies to support and encourage people to protect themselves. And I needed to provide the evidence and provide the support and encouragement needed. I spoke to Bangladeshi communities, spoke to Pakistani communities, which is one of the largest groups within Bradford district. For me, there were no barriers to protecting one another. And I'm still immersed in it. I don't think the pandemic's over. I've been to places and undertaken first ever events, engagement events with the communities, taken vaccines into areas that people were nervous and anxious about. We featured on some of the national media to say that, you know, family-centered approach is the right way. And I'm still doing the doing. And hopefully, you know, we will continue to protect as many people in the communities as we can. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Rekeya. Could I then move lastly but not least to Rezna Khatun, who is herself a writer and a survivor of domestic abuse and specialises in that arena now in her professional work. Rezna.
Hi everyone, so my name is Rezna Khatun, and I just want to say a massive thank you for inviting me. I don't have a very powerful CV like all these ladies do, but I'm going to try my best. So I come from a very, very strict Muslim practicing background. I was taken out of school when I was 14. I've had no education. I was born in this country, but because of my background, my dad didn't believe in the education system. But at the age of 43, I left my 25-year abusive relationship, narcissistic abuse. I became an author. I became #1 selling in Amazon, and my book is called Why I Love My Abuser. So I use my book and my story to raise awareness of domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse, childhood trauma, and the connection to mental health. I am also part of an empowering women's group, and we attend events, public speaking events to raise awareness on domestic abuse. We are also working towards empowering women and sexual empowerment within our society. My passion is to raise awareness on domestic abuse because I think the underlying issue comes from our childhood trauma, and that's something we need to work on to heal as people, to empower ourselves so we can achieve better things in life and bring better things in our home to our children. During COVID, the first COVID, I actually sold 300 books in a month. because domestic abuse was very, very high. Mental issues were very high because we were locked with our abusers in the house. We were spending more time with our abusers. So domestic abuse was really high. There was lots of murders, killing due to domestic abuse. And that was the highest time my book was sold. I was actually giving out my book in secret to ladies. I was meeting them down the road. I was meeting them in the park in secret because they didn't want the book to be received through the post so the abuser doesn't find it. Since then, I've been involved in many projects raising awareness on domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse, and I don't feel ashamed or don't feel bad that I have to use my own childhood trauma, my own life story in order to raise awareness, because I think it's such a taboo subject. It's a very secretive subject. So I talk about it openly. I connect with so many people from different backgrounds through social media that want to talk and connect about their childhood that they cannot talk to, say, an academic person or counselor, or they don't want to admit to themselves. It's my passion. It's what I do 24 hours a day. I eat, sleep, and talk about domestic abuse night and day. And I might have to leave this panel because I'm at work at the moment. So if anybody wants to connect with me or talk any further, I'm on Instagram under Healing Energy Within. I recently also opened my own healing candle business, which I'm helping people understanding about healing, because leaving an abusive relationship is the beginning of your life. So there's lots of challenges you face, which I faced. So we go on a healing process. So I talk about healing. So, and I've also done a healing candle range that helps us with our healing process. So thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Rekeya. And can I just say, you've been incredibly humble and self-effacing. I can't think of anything more powerful in the form of a CV than what you have managed to overcome and the contribution that you have made to others. So thank you for that. Right, well, I think that is all of the panel that we can get hold of now. I don't think Jusna's going to be able to make it. I ought to say at the outset that it's Ripon that should take credit for convening this stellar panel of speakers. A lot of work's gone into that. I'm very grateful to him. And I say he's assembled them. And in fact, you know, these are women who are jewels in the crown of our community. So essentially what he has done is curate this panel, in my view. I ought to just say very briefly, in terms of my involvement, I'm Sylheti Bangladeshi background. I was born in Bangladesh in Sylhet, in a village in Sylhet. I lived through the Liberation War. My family were very involved with the liberation movement, and we were targeted by the Pakistani army. My family were part of the Mukti Bahini, and I came here as a child from the village to the outskirts of East London, and I attended state schools. I went to the London School of Economics to read law. I then went to the bar, and I was a barrister practicing for 24 years in London. And for part of that time, I was a part-time judge. Since then, I've been made a circuit judge and also appointed thereafter as a deputy High Court judge. I've always undertaken work in the voluntary sector, huge range of issues, particularly for the benefit of the minority community that I come from, but also specifically for women and children. So domestic abuse refuge, Ashiana, I was a chair of that for a number of years and advised rights of women, Women's Aid, the NSPCC, etc. What we had to do in the justice system was respond very quickly and effectively to continue to offer a service for remedies and justice, including particularly domestic abuse. And the courts adapted really quickly, so much so that the volume of work that we actually conducted, and most of it was remote at this stage, by July, during the first tranche in 2020 of the pandemic, we delivered justice and dealt with more cases than we ever had hitherto, certainly in the family courts. So that's just a little overview of why I come to be involved in here. And I also helped draft the Forced Marriage Civil Protection Act of 2007. Right, so this is sort of part of International Women's Month. And there have been all sorts of events. It's so important to continue to highlight the issues facing women and also the work of women in this sector. So happy belated International Women's Day to you all. What I wanted to start with is, in light of the fact that women had played such a significant role, not only in the creation of Bangladesh, but the governance of it since, it seems that it's very important for us to revisit the role of the women from the British Bangladeshi community. Title of this seminar essentially is Bangladeshi Women Past, Present and COVID. And Bangladesh was formed at the cost of women. You may be familiar with the Birongana women, women who had been raped by the Pakistani army, who were supported by the state and supported in raising the children that they bore as a result of those rapes on a systemic scale. And also since then, of course, we've had, and you probably saw images of women bearing arms in order to liberate Bangladesh. And since then, we've had two prime ministers who are women. Now, you may have views about them in terms of it being dynastical appointments or degree of nepotism involved, but there was a degree of a democratic process involved in all of that as well. So that is the background, you know, the strength of women within our community, as well as within the majority faith, which is the Islamic faith. And so what I wanted to ask you all to address first of all, please, is we've celebrated 50 years now of the creation of Bangladesh. And since before that time, and certainly subsequent to that, we have had communities leaving Bangladesh to come and settle here in the UK. And I'd like to ask your views, please, about how you see the role of Bangladeshi women has changed, first of all, in the perceptions and context of the wider society in which we as a diaspora operate. And many of you are much younger than I am and will have been born and brought up here. You can incorporate in all of that, if you want, some of the issues that we had highlighted in the flyer for this event in terms of veils and arranged and forced marriages and family structures. So if I ask you, perhaps if I start with, I'll start with Megna, if I may. You're on mute, Megna. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Can.
Oh, brilliant. Yes, I just want to pick up on, yes, we've had amazing, you know, events and celebrations of Bangladesh 50 years. Since last year, it's been an ongoing journey, and it's been amazing as well. Just before I carry on, I just want to show everyone something. This is a sari, and this is actually 50 years old. And this was, these saris were printed during just after the Liberation War to raise money to support Bangladesh then. And my mum actually gave me this. So this is a lot of sentimental value. It says Shunar Bangla on there, Golden Bengal. So yeah.
Megna, can I just interrupt you to say, I have never seen someone else that has one. I have one too.
Oh my God,
father bought it for my mother on Liberation, and I wear it every year to reflect the Liberation. So it's wonderful to see yours is in a more pristine condition than mine, I think. So thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing that, because I haven't come across anyone who actually had this. And it's really so nice to hear that. So moving on from that, and I just want to mention a bit, when my father came here in the 50s, and he sort of set himself up. He was a very young man at that time. He worked himself up, and he worked in the steel industry. Then he bought his own house. He supported the family back home, and then got my mother over in the 60s, and then the family, obviously me and my siblings were born. I'm actually born in the Midlands in Worcestershire, and I've had a bit of a journey coming down. Lived in Birmingham for a while, and then settled in the late 80s in East London, where the retail industry, factory business, fashion industry was booming at that time. So I just want to mention a bit. I'm really proud to be a daughter of my parents. My dad always included my mom in all the decision making, and in the properties that he bought. They did business together, retail. They were in retail, bought houses. And I came across all my mother spoke about it and she didn't. Just the journey showing that my dad was so inclusive, you know, making sure we talk about equality, gender equality, and, you know, International Women's Day, every day we highlight certain themes. But I just want to say my dad, maybe he was forward thinking, or maybe he was just the way he was, just making sure that, you know, the girls and the women in the family were really empowered. Yet circumstances and community and certain family members didn't agree with what he was doing at that time. So coming on from that, I've just seen my mother became a widow very early on in the 40s. I lost my dad when I was only about 20, 21. And it's been really hard. It's been over 20 years. And just to stand on losing my father, and then finding I was going through what I was going through, a journey, and seeing that there were other women in situations that but seeing my mom, strong woman, bringing up 3 boys, and I was the eldest, that journey that she was going through, it wasn't easy. And then how do you develop? I just want to say there were, or there are, strong women. The first generation women, our mothers, our aunts, sisters, elder sisters, or family members and friends that have that. So the development has been a journey. Now there are a lot of, we have a lot of things in place to encourage the generation now, the diaspora, now the new generation of young women that are growing up. And we can share those experiences with the generation now, to develop them, to encourage them. I know the other ladies had mentioned about mentoring, providing programs, projects, that we can all, you know, put that out in the community and really speak up about our own journeys, and not just when it's, so for example, when it's raising awareness or when it's at a certain occasion, but it's an everyday thing that we need to push those boundaries, push those, challenge ourselves and overcome those barriers as well.
Thank you. If I can then ask Tanzila to speak to us about that, and really to confine ourselves, first of all, to the role of Bangladeshi women in the majority community and society at large, and how that has evolved and changed.
Thank you so much, Honorable Judge. It's been very, very privileged within all of you together, and I'm so humble. Yeah, well, the thing is, the time is evolved, and nowadays the women, they raise their voice, they understand their personal development, they understand how they can be more delicate, they could be more leader in those, you know, society where they are neglected. So I you know, in my tender age, over, you know, few, you can say, young age, I can see how my mom was, you know, dealing with family. So now I can see I am taking over, like I can share my mind and opinion. So where we can be more forwarded. So nowadays our society is really, our women are more empowered, and they feel more personal development, and they are come out in the ratio of the previous decades. So in this situation, I can see in my whole generation, okay, I am the Tanzila, I came in London alone. It was not possible, my mom's and my aunt's generation, but I take the braveness. I'm happy to take my initiative myself to go abroad, have my master degree, work in a world largest engineering firm, and my family could never ever think about I am out of my own house. But look at my life. So I am here, I can do that. And I see more and more women, they are doing more. And we are really, really proud of them. And I can say it's a very positive impact. And over the year, if you go for the statistic in British community in UK, and you can see those domestic violence, those women were depressed. So now they really raise their voice. I'm so honored to find out here those sister here. One of the sister is Megna. I know she's amazing sister. Survival, also other sister. It's amazing, and you can see the evolvement. And yeah, thank you so much. It's been so honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I can then ask Ummul, please.
Yeah, so you talked about perceptions, and I think what I found was in the industries that I came to work in. So I was a bicyclist, so I was cycling in my early 20s to work in media, and I worked for a major company, and I was sort of asked questions like, are you going to have an arranged marriage? This is a young woman with a master's degree, this is like there was so much prejudice within that. And I think I was the only person in any of my companies who was a person of color in content creation. So in kind of actually doing sort of decision-making roles. I work in the humanitarian aid industry now. So I run my own organization. I've lived abroad for a number of years. And I contract to the UN, Save the Children. They hire my organization to run projects. And I don't see people like me in a level leadership position. And I find that we always have to try that little bit harder. And I know a lot of people have talked about this, but you always have to be ahead of the game. I speak 5 languages. I have a master's degree. I mean, I'm a kickboxer, but why do we have to have so many sides to ourselves to be acceptable that you're actually okay to have in this position? I think that's one of the things that I would like to see is different. We are all exceptional in our different ways. You don't have to be so hardworking your life just to gain value in the majority community, as you put it. And I think also we have to be very careful when we enter these spaces, because the perceptions against us are so strong that when we challenge them, people don't want to allow us to have that space. In my early 20s, I was on a business trip and I was sexually assaulted by a security guard. So I was come up from behind, somebody strangled me. This is a man, and I'm 5'3", and he forced himself on me. So that's the beginning, so that really traumatized me. Fortunately, I beat the living SHIT out of this guy because of my years of training. I left him on the floor crying. I kicked him through 2 rooms. Like, we don't hear these stories. When I told my company about it, and I said we need to look at issues around women, how they go to the Middle East, we're very vulnerable. I was told I was creating problems. And I've had this in my experience through my professional career, that if you raise your voice, you have to be very careful, because people sometimes don't want to hear the different perspectives that you bring to the table, and it can blacklist you and it can cause issues. So can we be courageous enough to say those stories? And I think we need one another's support to allow us to do this. So yeah, I think we've come a long way. But I do see that, the next generation, our generation, we've still got so much fighting to do. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think you actually raised one of the important things, and that's reflected really in the people that have joined us today on this occasion, and that is allyship. There's only so much we can do alone. And as feisty and motivated as we are, we work within structures that are patriarchal. There is structural racism in place, gender-specific issues at play, and we need the support of men and people from the majority community. So if I can ask Rezna then to address that as well. We're dealing at the moment with just perceptions of British Bangladeshi women in this country and how that is reflected and how that has changed.
Sorry, Rezna had to go because she's working. She left it.
She said she might have to go. Not to worry. I'll go to Julie then, please. Julie Begum.
Hello. Yes. Like the previous speakers have said, we as Bengali women are a minority within minorities, and often our stories aren't represented in mainstream societies. And when South Asian stories are being told, you know, we're usually at the bottom of the list. Other South Asian stories are more prominent in the UK as well as other places in the world. And I think it's really within that context that we are a lot more feistier than a lot of other communities, because we have to be. And like you said, Judge Sapnara, it takes solidarity within a community amongst all members of that community, men and women, boys and girls, in order to make sure that we challenge these inequalities within our own communities so we can promote the best in our own in the girls and women that are in all the families that I've come across have been led by really strong women and girls in the ways that they've confronted any issues and problems. And both men and women have benefited from this engagement in interaction. Where we fall down is when men aren't supporting the women in their lives to make sure that we are confronting the issues that affect the whole community.
One of the issues that has come up time and again for women who are Black, brown, of a minority ethnic background is that you've already described, some of you, including you, Julie, about the disproportionate need for us to try and assert ourselves from time to time. And feisty is one way of describing it, but a problematic issue is that it sort of sometimes plays to tropes, etc., that people hold of aggressive Black women, brown women, minority ethnic women. Is that something that you have experienced in the work that you've done or personally?
Yes. Often we are branded as troublemakers, as Ummul has suggested and referred to, and we are seen in that way because we speak up, we're assertive, we are not afraid to be disliked because we've been through very difficult times, and it doesn't hurt us to be disliked by other people or even hated. You know, I grew up in the 70s in Brick Lane in Tower Hamlets, where we were literally hated and people try to kill us for the color of our skin. So it doesn't take a lot for, you know, we have developed thick skins in order to survive the different difficulties and inequalities that we face in our lives.
Well, it seems what that describes really graphically, doesn't it? That phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, literally. I think a lot of us experienced that proximity to actual physical danger and overcoming all of that. Thank you for that, Julie. And lastly, I think it's Hasina who hasn't addressed this question yet. Hasina, are you there? If you are, we can't see or hear you. She might have dropped out. We'll wait for her to come back and join us. And while we do that, what I'd like, oh, there you are, Hasina.
I'm back.
Hello there. I don't know what happened there.
For some reason.
All right, no problem. So you heard the question. Would you mind addressing that from your experience and perspective, please?
Yeah, and I will really focus on my perspective because, as previous speakers have said, the pandemic's highlighted and exacerbated existing inequalities, particularly within the British Bangladeshi community, but particularly for women from that community. I mean, research has found that women from this community experienced higher levels of stress and greater mental health issues in comparison to women from other BAME communities. And as some of the other speakers have said, that there are many reasons for this, including structural inequalities in accessing good quality housing, health services, discrimination in employment opportunities, and having lower incomes, amongst other things. But I feel that there are better speakers than me on this panel to talk about those things. So I want to focus on why I set up my jewellery brand, Soul Gems London, during the pandemic, in my son's memory. Setting up the jewellery brand was a real departure from my previous career. And it was a pretty daunting prospect to launch a business during a global pandemic. However, my son, Sammy, was very entrepreneurial, and from a young age, he'd always encouraged me to go into business. I had no idea how to combine this with my passion for jewellery and my faith-based values until the idea for Soul Gems London was born in 2019. There was one particular piece in my collection, which is called the Paradise Necklace, which was created especially in Sammy's memory. So whilst trying to overcome some of the trauma of the loss of my only child, I saw an Arabic proverb online, which was, "In paradise, there is love without separation." This really resonated with me because it gave me hope that beyond this life, there is something, there is a better place, and that I will see Sammy again. Because one of the things I went through was sort of guilt for not being there as much as I could have been because I was pursuing my career. So many other emotions went through me, anger, many things. So when I saw this, actually, it filled me with so much peace. And I decided then to have the proverb made up into a necklace as a constant reminder for myself. So it would have the Arabic lettering on one side and then the English meaning on the other. And then I thought, we're in the midst of a pandemic. There are other people that probably need from our communities that are probably going through similar situations, trauma, you know, loved ones being in hospital, not being able to see them, the death of loved ones as I had experienced. And I thought, well, I'd already been thinking about it as a concept, but I never really did anything about it. And I thought, this is the time if I'm going to do anything. So I launched the business. I had planned to launch it just before Ramadan, but with the pandemic, a lot of people were saying, a lot of my friends were saying, this is not the right time. You know, people are dying. It's not the right time to launch a jewelry brand. But other friends were saying, actually, this is the exact right time because there are pieces on there that talk about sabr, which is patience. One of the pieces I'm wearing here has Arabic calligraphy and it says tawakkul, which is about having complete trust and faith in Allah. So I decided to go ahead with it. I had no brand presence, excuse me, nobody had heard of me, nobody knew what Soul Gems London was about. But I started setting up an Instagram page. I started obviously sourcing, having samples made up. And I thought, you know what, I'm really going to do this. This is the right time for me. I feel I'm very led by my heart and my instincts. I sometimes try to take my brain with me as well. But I thought I really want to do this right now. After launching, I had really amazing feedback from people. I mean, one customer in particular bought 3 pieces of the Paradise necklace because friends of theirs had lost family members. And they started giving, you know, my customers started giving me feedback, saying how much hope it had brought them. There was one lady who had gone through domestic violence for 28 years before deciding to leave that partner. And I had a bangle in the collection which said, make dua and have hope. And she said, you know, every time I wear that, it makes me feel good because it's a beautiful piece of jewelry. But at the same time, it gives me that hope. And there was another lady who had lost her daughter and she bought a piece that says sabr, this too shall pass. And so making those connections with people was really important to me. Non-Muslim friends of mine and actually just non-Muslim customers have brought pieces from my collection because they've emailed me and said, oh, I really like this piece, but what does this mean? So I tried to explain, I'm not a scholar, but I tried to explain to them from an Islamic perspective, but also my own personal perspective on what having patience means, what having faith in Allah means. And through that, non-Muslims started to buy my jewelry. And I started thinking, you know, this wasn't really the plan. I wanted to do something to remind people about Allah, to keep my son's memory alive. But what I'm noticing here is that through something as small as a beautiful piece of jewelry, you know, barriers between communities and faiths can be broken down. And I thought, if I can continue doing this, this would be a great thing. I mean, Sami was an amazing young man. He was loved by so many, and he wanted to help those who were less fortunate than him. And in the month of Ramadan, before in the previous year, before his death, he had fundraised for a charity in the UK. And I just wanted to keep those things alive and tell people about them and tell our community about Sami. You know, there are other pieces in the collection that talk about gratitude. The key thing is that the messages in my jewelry are very positive. They're very uplifting, and they're constant reminders that outside of ourselves, there is a higher purpose and a plan for our life. Whether you believe in God or have, you know, are of no faith, these messages can connect people up from every background. And I felt I wanted to share that. And during the kind of lockdown, many people were in isolation. They couldn't see loved ones. And they would actually message me. A lot of them have become friends and tell me about their situations. And they would ask me to get personalized pieces made up for them. And it was just such a great way of connecting with the community and sharing these uplifting messages. And for me now, when I look back on it, I think actually it's not such a big departure from what I was doing before, because in the end, the jewelry brand, all the work I was doing in comms, all the stuff I was doing in kind of the charity sector, in the end, it's about connecting with people. And ultimately, it's those connections that bring a sense of purpose and meaning to our lives. And so I was really touched by what you said at the beginning, that you'd been given some of my jewelry. I mean, it kind of connected us in a way without, and we'd never met previous to this. And really that's what it's about, connecting people and giving them some hope. You know, we live in a very turbulent, very, you know, challenging world, but within that world, there is hope. And that's really what I wanted to do. And I felt that the pandemic was the perfect time to then go ahead and launch it.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Hasina. Yes, I mean, as I say, I knew nothing about the backdrop to the jewelry. The jewelry in itself was beautiful, and my clerks had given that to me as a farewell gift, and I was really moved. I was moved by the inscriptions in it. I'm actually incredibly fussy about my jewelry, and people can't readily buy things for me that I like, but they were on site. I absolutely love them, and now that I know what the backdrop to it is. I mean, what an incredible way to honour your son and to remember him. I'm so sorry for your loss, but what a positive thing to come out of it. And I wish you every success. Someone's asking what the jewellery business is called. It's called Soul Gems, S-O-U-L, Gems, London, LDN. That's right, isn't it, Hasina? Have I got that right?
That's correct. Yes, thank you.
Good. Thank you very much.
Anyway.
All right, now Jusna has managed to join us. Jusna, thank you very much. I'm so sorry that we've had difficulties having you connect. Thank you very much for joining us. You've missed a little bit of what we have been discussing. And you are the lady who has had the incredible task, albeit I suspect you'll say it's also a privilege to be able to be in charge of washing the bodies of the deceased. And you have probably never been more busier and more challenged than during the time of COVID. We all sat at home and watched on the news, etc., really distressing stories of families separated, unable to perform last rites. I mean, that heartbreaking story of that young Muslim boy in South London who died alone without any member of his family being present. And of course, those women ended up in your hands. So thank you for the work that you do. And I think I would just take this opportunity to ask you what your experiences have been in the work that you do over the years and how that has changed and evolved.
So first,
I'd like to apologise due to the connection error. I've been trying to connect.
Not at all. Please don't apologise.
Second of all, I think what previous to the pandemic, I was working with Muslim burials and I was dealing with a lot of burials and ghusl, because I lost my sister in 2013 who used to do ghusl on female deceased, and I always thought, what an awful job to do. And how, I used to question her, why do you have to do it? Why do you do it? Like, sort of, I used to question her. And I think it's only when she passed away, I started learning myself, and I started performing ghusl on female Muslim bodies. And that's where my experience came in. And prior to COVID, I actually left that field and I started a CIC company called Eastern Project, which is again supporting the women in our community with many issues that were raised today, such as sexual harassment and so forth. Anyway, and during the pandemic, our whole business idea changed because the need in our community had changed. And the need was, people were not having access to food. People were, so many things were happening. People didn't know what was happening, what to expect. And I think we took it on board. We prioritized and we were supporting the community with food. We set up a food bank in our local mosque in partnership with our local church and mosque and community, and we were doing the food bank. And as well as people started calling me, previous contact, people started contacting me, what do we do? So-and-so has died, and every day we would get message, at least 5, 6, 7 people have passed away from COVID. One of the things, quickly, I had to take action because at the beginning of pandemic, our community, because our elders in our community were affected, as well as the BAME community, as well as the women, people didn't know what to do. For example, people were going to, when the ambulance came to take them, they were put in an ambulance on their own, not with a family member. Hence these elderlies will usually go to doctor's appointments with their child or a translator. They were put in an ambulance, taken to the hospital, and that was it. And many families from all walks of life, professionals, it's like, they were like, what's going on? So one night I had this phone call, and it was from one of our local mothers, and she said, Sister Jusna, my dad's really, really bad. He's got really bad COVID. We called the ambulance. They're coming in the next 5 minutes. What shall I do? And I had to take the difficult situation, but because they were not washing the deceased at the time, because of COVID, we didn't know what was happening, how it would spread. I had to tell this young mother that they should, if they can, possibly can, sort of like give, how could I tell someone, say goodbye, that you'll never see them again, they won't be deceived, you're not going to be washing them. Just said, make sure they're in good clothing, plain clothing, or cut their nails if it's too long. And so, well, Dad's ill, why am I going to cut nails? It's like, I found it difficult myself. And then that night, her father passed away. Then I took the drastic action. I think I know it's sensitive issues, it's a sensitive matter. As much as it is difficult for me to tell people to prepare for the worst, I need to do it. So then on, I had many other phone calls. At one point, I had one of our neighbors who called me up and said, my mom's going in, the ambulance is coming to take my mom. I had to take the difficult situation that this could be the last time she sees her mom. I said, can you open your mom's gold jewelry and stuff, and they said, why? Why? And I said, because just in case anything happens, you won't be able to wash and you won't be able to keep her jewelry. She turned around and she said, if I open my mom's bangle, she would think she's dying and she's going to give up. So what do I do? So she didn't open her mom's bangles, but in her head, she did the other stuff. She gave her mom a good thorough wash. And she left the bangle, because bangle in our community, taking the bangle off is when for some reason, culturally, when your husband dies, you take your bangles off or you're dying. But, because she said, Mom, I need to clean your ears, and she took the earring off, but the bangles, she couldn't even approach the bangles, because that's another level. And her mom went to the hospital. It was Ramadan time as well. She went, her mum went to the hospital, and 5 minutes before iftar time, the hospital called and said, your mum's stable. And, you know, she was really happy. 15 minutes later, they got that awful phone call that we all read during the time, that your mother's just passed away. And, you know, that was it. Back then, people were not instructed what to do, because our local mosques, morgues were full. Morgues were like inundated. And I don't know if you guys, anyone's aware of that video was going around of the morgue that was full. The East London Mosque took a drastic action. They had to quickly rebuild one of the TFL office, not office, so like a store. They had to quickly refurbish that and transfer it into like a freezers, giant freezers. It's like to make it to convert it into a morgue, and that's what happened. And these these affected many of the women in our community, because it was either the husband or the children or themselves or the sisters, and you know, it's left a lot of traumatic experience till this day. It's been like 3 years we've had the pandemic, and many women, especially women, many families like are still struggling with the thought of how they said goodbye to their loved ones. They couldn't say a proper goodbye, or they felt, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. So, you know, we are still suffering, you know, in the community.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes.
Okay. Also, just mention, you mentioned that I was in charge. I was not in charge. There were 50 volunteers from Tower Hamlets, Newham and Hackney. The Muslim women from various backgrounds, Pakistani, Gujarati, Bangladeshi, got together, and we had the brother section as well, because the men were dealing with the female disease, we were dealing with female disease. We were, because of the availability in local mosques, they then set up, Iman Channel, they set up their own sort of, like they bought a van, like an ambulance, and a group of volunteers, and they were dealing with the disease without charging any families, anything. Everything was done by volunteers. We were washing, after a few months, we started washing the COVID patients. It was all done by over 50 volunteers, and they managed to pick up the bodies when they went to the burial grounds and did everything, you know, all voluntary. So it was like a community team, it's like got united team action.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was aware of that, and we're so grateful to them and to you. It's such an important right, and it's incredible, isn't it, how few of us think about the end and think about what is required of us and what the processes are until it hits us. And you're the one that's at the coalface, as it were, of dealing with that situation, which is traumatic and distressing in the best of times, but in the context of COVID, with all the challenges that you face, that you were all able to adapt and offer that service, which has been of tremendous reassurance and solace, I think, to people. Well, may you be blessed. I'm sure you already are, but may you be blessed. For those that haven't actually engaged in ghusl, or the actual formal rites of bathing a body for preparation for burial and for the hereafter, all I can say is my own personal experience is that it's something that I could never have imagined doing for anyone, much less my own mother. But it provided a structure to the grieving process, and it was profoundly healing. And so I wasn't actually at all fearful, and it is a privilege to be able to do something like that, perform a task like that for your loved ones at the end. So thank you very much for that. I think we're almost running out of time before we get to the Q&A session. I didn't want to stop any of you because it's also interesting and so valuable. But very briefly, and I'm going to ask each of you to be very brief, please. It is just to tell us anything else that you experienced or observed, which have been challenges within the family, given the pivotal role of women within the Bangladeshi community and within families, and having to manage the loss and having to manage the challenges that COVID additionally threw up with extended families, multi-generational households, who we know were disproportionately impacted by COVID because of innate structural inequalities, which were exacerbated. Could you just tell us that, each of you? And I'm going to go first of all to Julie, please.
I think, as you've highlighted before, that some of the patriarchal practices within our culture and religion really are a deterrent for a lot of girls and women to progress and achieve our potential. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Tanzila?
In a nutshell, I would like to say that it is really, really hard in a normal women development and come out from the light, the darkness to the light. And in addition to COVID, as you mentioned, the word, honestly speaking, is not easy. It's really hard because I had my severe COVID, and most of the people, no, they don't know, because I don't put in my Facebook or other social media. So I think this is a very, very hard time to honestly cope self. Of course, within losing family member also is a very crucial, emotional feelings. But I will never say, don't be emotional. I will say, everyone, you must be emotional. You must be feel sad, upset, or cry or anything. No, you don't stop the emotions. All you need to do, be resilient. You need to say yourself, I am going through this situation. It's hard, but may Allah help you. May Allah help me to cope the situation. So try not to be manipulated, just try to be sympathize yourself, feel yourself, and be resilient, and you'll be fine. I know it's hard, but you'll be fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ummul, I know that you told us you were out of the jurisdiction here, and you had a brother like me, who's a doctor working in the NHS, I presume. But what could you add to the discussion now about the family, the internal family unit within the Bangladeshi community, and the impact of COVID and the challenges, quite apart from COVID, that present themselves to women who are central to those families?
A lot of the women who came into the UK, our mother's generations, came really young. The husbands were older. And one of the things I've seen is the widow, that they're now being left behind. So a lot of women, like their husbands have died. And there's a massive widow community in the area sort of where I live. And I think that was all exacerbated by COVID, because you think about violence and trauma and then having to live with other family members. If you're living with your son and his wife or somebody else. And how do you take care of your own community? And I think also these women had a lot of traumas when they came to the country. They were very, very young and they had to go through a lot. And now they've lost their husbands, they're going through COVID, the extended family is looking after them, or are they looking after their extended family? And I've seen a lot of these problems arise. And I think they're kind of like a forgotten generation of women in a way. And we kind of don't look at them because a lot of them can't speak English very well. They have health problems. They have very different perspectives, perhaps. And I kind of see that through COVID, their lot has changed and they need a lot more space and support from other women who are younger and perhaps have more voice. And I would really like to see that happen. And I think we also took for granted very much their struggles that they came into the country with. And I'm now an immigrant second time over in many ways. So I live in Germany. I speak very bad German. And sort of being an immigrant has given me, and also lived in the Middle East, I have a sort of empathy with what these women went through. So I think that's something that we could shed a little bit more light on and do some more work with these women.
Thank you. And Hasina?
Hi. So I was on my own during the pandemic and I felt very isolated. So setting up my business really helped me. As women, we have so much strength and resilience within us, and that's how I found my strength and coping mechanism by setting up the business. I mean, what I saw around me was people being incredibly kind to each other, families and neighbours supporting each other, checking up on each other, doing food drops. People really came together, and that helped us to deal with the emotions that we were experiencing. But the thing I would like to end off on is that sometimes the last person we are kind to is ourselves. As I mentioned, I spent a lot of time after my son's death feeling very guilty for working long hours, for telling him off, for leaving his trainers at the bottom of the stairs. You know, I felt angry sometimes. I was consumed by grief and sorrow. And sometimes I felt all of those emotions within the space of 10 minutes. So I was really hard on myself, but I think it's so important for our mental health to be kind to ourselves. We have to give ourselves a break, and we have to forgive ourselves for our own shortcomings as mothers, as daughters, as wives, you know, all these myriad of roles that we play in our communities. And we do it for everybody, and we do it because we love them, but we also have to love ourselves and be kind to ourselves.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you. Megna. And while we're waiting for Megna, this is the time, if any of you want to pose a question, then if you could do it in the chat, and we'll be able to see it and put it to the panel after we finish this round of questions and reflections. So Megna, are you still there? Possibly not. All right, Rekeya.
Thank you ever so much. I'm just so emotional listening to you know, the members. I was in the first and second wave of the pandemic working in the acute sector, and the deaths that I think was Jusna that was talking about, it resonates. I was with some of the, in particular, a Bangladeshi lady that will live with me for the rest of my life. I've seen most things, but some of the heartbreaking stories where families have to say goodbye virtually will stay with me. And one particular Bangladeshi woman will stay with me because I was called on the tannoy as a senior manager because we were, I suppose, in battle mode. So there were 2 or 3 senior managers in roles, because if one of us got COVID, then how do we stabilize and sustain our services and care for our public? So we went in, you know, 3 or 4 rows. So if one became unwell, then the next one can take over. And I was called on the tannoy, a Bangladeshi woman, and my name came up straight away because people knew. So I went to see this lady and say to her that there was everything that we did that we could have done, and it was time to say goodbye. And I remember saying, breaking etiquette and saying, "Auntie, what can I do to make you comfortable?" That will stay with me for the rest of my life. And she stroked my face and she said, "Nothing, child, nothing." She squeezed my hand and she said, "Will you give me some water?" She was all masked up. And I remember 2 young doctors, both Asians, probably very, very young, and the likes of which they'll never see. So my daughter is in her 5th year of medicine. And every time I went out, working what we call in the red zones to do 5-6 hours, caring for our patients, doing the best we can, they were worried for me because most of them are in the NHS. And the other daughter that's working in law, I've put in the chat to Judge Sapnara, she's just done her bars today. So the values that, thank you so much. I've mentioned you to her.
Well, get her in touch with me. Get her in touch with me if she wants.
I have to have your email. That was me, you know, mentioning.
You can get that from Ripon if she wants to come and marshal me, and
yes, please.
sort out some mini pupillage.
That would be amazing. Well. So the values, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. The values we instill in our children of care, compassion, whether it's for Bangladeshis or those around us, is what will be taken forward because we owe it to them. So whether you're a healthcare professional or not, it touches you. The humanity in you touches you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Jusna, I was coming to you next in any event you've got your hand up. Yes. You're on mute at the moment.
I'm going to say something, but it's just gone out of my head now. But what I was trying to say is Trying to remember.
You will have observed family dynamics, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And they're always at a pronounced stage when people are grieving. And one of the issues that I was asking people to reflect on and for their observations is those challenges within the families that women have had to manage, particularly during COVID.
I think, yeah, that's what, basically in our community, when someone passes away, we have like the whole community out to come and so like give their condolences, and they give food to the family that have just lost someone, and all the traditional was gone out the window during COVID time. And I think that affected more. For example, for myself, I lost 3 members of my family to COVID. I lost my mother-in-law, my eldest brother, my eldest sister. And you don't like grieving process. Normally you grieve with the other family members, but we couldn't get together because everybody was grieving in their own houses. They were grieving on their own more like it. And I think that has a major impact mentally on everyone. The other thing I'd like to specifically say is working during the pandemic, I think you always need to have that person that's supporting you behind the scene. For me, it was my family, and I have to say, a really good, 2 good sisters of mine, Dr. Caroline. He was always pulling me up and advising me. The first thing she said, "Are you okay?" And I'd say, like, Sister Tahira, I think she's also in this meeting. You know, you were always there to take that phone call. When I was pulling the Garden of Peace, the burial ground, they were able to call the hospital to release the body, sort of thing. And, I could actually give them the contact details, and then, it's like we had to work in partnership to secure that burial, because, sometimes they were saying like it will take 2 weeks to bury someone, when we were so used to burying the Muslim burial theme of burying someone, and that was the next day. So it was like a major challenge, and that affected many families, because once someone died, until they are buried, you can't sort of like get on with anything. And, it's like, not only are you grieving, you're always also stressing what's happening. What are we going to do? You're not allowed to open the body bags. You're not allowed to even see who you're burying. And I think that had a major impact on families and, communities.
Thank you very much. I mean, any one of these women could fill an entire session of discussion, but I can't see any questions at the moment in the chat. I'm going to thank all of our panelists for the contributions so far. I'm really grateful to you all. I hope that has been a real demonstration to everyone online of the powerful, moving, enriching, ultimately humbling nature of the skills and talents and the goodness, the sheer goodness of the women that we see before us, and so many more in the community. And it's quite right that in this month we celebrate them, celebrate and recognise the roles that they have taken in incredibly challenging circumstances historically as well as now, and the sheer depth and richness of that experience. We're really honoured that you could all be here and take your valuable time at a weekend to be able to share that with us. What I'm going to do now is ask, I haven't seen questions, as I say, so I'm going to ask Professor Mahendra Patel to join us, and I'll hand over to you, Ripon, in terms of what it is that Dr. Patel wanted to address us about, please. Dr. Patel, Professor Patel, if you're there, I can't see or hear you now. But perhaps, I don't know if you're on mute, if you could just tell us a little bit about what you do. Yes. And the message that you want to communicate, please. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you very much. I'm Professor Mahendra Patel, Professor of Pharmacy, and one of the national leads of the panoramic study at the University of Oxford. And I've been listening to the dialogue and the conversation. You're an inspiration, everybody here. And I wish I could have joined longer, really. In fact, to say that I've just ran away from my football game just to come here and speak to you and meet you all. What I'd like to talk about very briefly is, and it's very saddening to hear the stories around how COVID has affected people, but also on here that we continue to refresh and see in our minds, really. And I suppose it will continue to linger with us as we hear more and more stories and people continue to express and share those stories. And it's the longer term impact. It's not just one individual person, but it's the wider family and the wider impact it's had. And it is saddening, you know, you've just heard there 3 people within the family affected, and we continue to hear that. I don't know if you've heard the news lately, but the COVID cases are now again increasing in some parts, with hospitalization increasing and with new variants potentially around the corner. So we haven't turned this corner yet in any way. But what I'm wanting to reach out to you, Judge Sapnara and Ripon, thank you for inviting me on this really true platform for celebrating International Women's Day and the month that you're having here with BritBangla and the women here, really. And what I found, my role is Inclusion Diversity Lead at the University of Oxford for the trial. The Panoramic Trial is the world's largest recruiting clinical trial now ever of its kind. And what does it do? And this is to reduce the inequalities, and that's why I'm reaching out to you as well, really. And I'm just really, truly grateful for having this opportunity. If we don't know about something, then that means we're going to widen inequality when the rest of the larger communities in the cohort do. And then it becomes our choice at least, but it's actually raising that awareness. And the Panoramic Trial is a new antiviral agent that has been approved by the MHRA, the licensing body which regulates use of all medicines in the UK. But that is for the most highest clinically vulnerable patients. What we want to do is see how this new antiviral molnupiravir, which we've got at the moment, which is the first to be licensed in the world for the treatment of COVID-19, very early on. People have symptoms, and then what we find is they get into hospital and there are treatments at that point as we're moving through the pandemic. What we want to do is, just like if you've got a bacterial infection of the chest and you have some antibiotics, that's how we want to get to it. Simple treatment, oral medication taken by mouth, that's already been approved and licensed. We want to see how it works in the next group of people. The next group of people being anybody over 18 with any underlying health conditions. So that's things like respiratory conditions, severe mental health, a BMI of more than 35, it could be heart disease, diabetes type 1 or type 2, those sorts of things. And then anybody over 50 are more at risk of becoming severely ill with COVID-19 and even being hospitalized. What we want to do is reduce those symptoms, help people to recover very quickly and prevent hospitalization. You may ask the question, why do we need to still continue with a trial and a study when it's already been licensed? Well, actually, this has been proven to be effective. 30% reducing in hospitalization rates in countries outside the UK. But what that population is that it's been an unvaccinated population. As you know, in the UK, we have a largely vaccinated population. And we want to see how it works. Is it as effective in that vaccinated population as well, really? And therefore, we can roll it out to those people that need it the most as quickly as possible as part of standard NHS care. So it is easy to join the Panoramic study, www.panoramic.org. You can Google Panoramic as well. And there's also a free phone number, which is 08081 560017. Now, why do I want to reach out to you? What we've found is that it's the fastest and the largest recruiting clinical trial in the world. Why do we still need to reach out to communities? People from ethnic minority communities are the lowest in terms of recruitment numbers. We've had 1% in the Black community, up to 4% in the South Asian or the Asian community. Now, when you're talking, we've recruited 15,000 patients in just over 100 days, 110 days. We don't want that inequality, and I keep saying that we need to work with the communities, reach out to the communities, engage with the communities and bring them on board. So I'm saying, here's the awareness, that's the trial. If anybody has COVID-19 symptoms, tested positive with a lateral flow test or a PCR test with symptom within the first 5 days, then it's easy to join. Or the treatment and any information pack is sent directly to your home, free of charge. And if you're on the treatment arm, it's a 5-day course. And there's a follow-up. We follow up every day 7, day 14, and day 28 by the study team from the University of Oxford. If you're on the other arm, there's 2 arms at the moment, the treatment arm, which is a new agent, and the other arm, which is standard care. So the treatment arm is standard care, which is what we have with NHS, plus the treatment, or the standard care, which is the normal NHS care that you have. If you have COVID, you isolate, symptoms get worse, you call your doctor or you ring NHS 111. That still applies. If you're on the standard care, you are still playing your part, because we are looking at, does this medication work better than the standard care that we're already providing? And if so, we want to roll it out as quickly as possible. So you are playing your part in humanity. But the other thing is, if anybody wants to help and support, we've mentioned inequalities, and I'm lucky in a sense that working at the world's leading research centre, in the world's leading university, on the largest clinical trial ever, is I want to bring people to the party and be seen. And this is something that the Bangladeshi community, I want to show them that these are the communities that we need to reach out at this level in order to engage and give that message effectively. So that's my message, really. I'd like to thank you very, very much. It is about raising that awareness. If anybody does have COVID-19, it's a simple treatment. And for anybody who may fast over Ramadan, it is a twice daily course if you're in the treatment arm. So therefore you could have it between when you start your fast and when you break your fast as well, really, just before you start and when you break your fast. So any questions I'm open to.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Patel. I would just urge everyone, please, to disseminate this information about the trial, urge people to get involved, because where would we be if it were not for the work of people like Professor Patel and all those expert medical professionals, scientists and researchers. And we have to do our bit, it seems to me, to help them, to help us all. And as he says, join in that cause for the betterment of humanity is vital. So thank you very much, Professor Patel. I don't think we've got any more time now. We've run out of time for questions to you or to the panel. I've heard they've all heard your message loud and clear, and that this will be disseminated widely. I'm going to thank everyone again, all the panel, as well as all of those participants who have joined us. I really hope that you have found it as thought-provoking, enlightening, but also life-affirming and positive in terms of the future for the British Bangladeshi community, and that, like me, who already had a very healthy regard and respect for my sisters in the community, that will have been enriched and enhanced beyond measure. I'm sure there's been a lot of food for thought there, a lot of things to reflect, and that you know, I certainly have learned from each and every speaker. So thank you very much. And so I'm going to hand over to Ripon now to close the event. Thank you, Ripon. And again, thank you, Ripon, for organising this and getting together this amazing round of women. Thank you.
And Judge Sapnara, you won't believe it. No one could do better than you have with this group. I can reassure you that. So I'm very, very grateful. And I also want to say, I'm very grateful for all the panelists who have taken part. Your experience is what makes it enriching for us to hear. And what's annoying for me is the fact that we usually hear history from his point of view. I'm so grateful to hear now the story from hers, not just simply from hers, but hers from Bangladeshi women's perspective. So I'm very, very grateful, and thank you for actually putting your life experiences on a plate for us so we can then understand, because your experience is as, or in fact more enriching than his story. And so I'm very grateful. And I'm very grateful also for Professor Patel for actually sharing the early treatment as well. But of course, just like everything else, if something starts, it also has to come to an end. And it's sad to say that also this public meeting has to also come to an end. And I hope it's a beginning of something other than end in itself. So if we can find a way where, as part of International Women's History, we have a regular annual British Bangladeshi women's history moving forward, it would be a delight to carry on doing that. But of course, you gave your 2 hours for us on Sunday. That's long enough. And I'm sure you're feeling exhausted and it's time for you to have your rest. So on that note, on behalf of, let me emphasize, BritBanglaCovid, I would like to say farewell to you all, and go and have your tea and coffee and put your feet up and relax and enjoy your rest of the weekend. So see you later. And thank you.